Beneath the streets of New York City lies a world most never think about, a world of tunnels, steel, and electric pulse. It began with a single daring idea and grew into one of humanity's greatest urban undertakings. On the night of October 27, 1904, the first subway cars thundered under Manhattan from City Hall to 145th Street. Crowds filled the streets to watch as Mayor George McClellan Jr. pulled the lever to start the inaugural train. The air was filled with pride, awe, and disbelief. The age of the underground city had begun. But this story doesn't start in 1904. It starts with chaos above ground, a city suffocating in its own success. By the late 1800s, New York had become a metropolis of 5 million people crammed into narrow streets. Horse-drawn carriages and elevated steam trains clogged the air with noise and soot. The city's arteries were failing. The people who dreamed of building a city of the future realized something had to change. What followed was a century-long struggle of ambition, politics, greed, and survival. A story as turbulent and alive as New York itself. New York was always destined to be a place of extremes. Its geography shaped its destiny, an island hemmed in by rivers desperate to expand. Manhattan was small but powerful. Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island were growing in population but separated by waterways. Connecting them meant overcoming nature itself. And in that challenge, the subway found its purpose, to unify what rivers and distance had divided. In the late 1800s, one man decided to take that dream literally underground. His name was Alfred Ely Beach, a publisher and inventor. In 1869, without official approval, he secretly began digging a tunnel beneath Broadway. Working at night to avoid detection, he built a 312-foot-long tube powered by a massive fan, the Beach Pneumatic Transit. For a short time, visitors could pay 25 cents to ride a small car pushed by air through the tunnel. It was futuristic, silent, and astonishing. But politics and corruption stopped it cold. The project was shut down, and the tunnel sealed. The idea, however, refused to die. The city had gotten a glimpse of the possible, and when the Great Blizzard of 1888 buried the elevated lines and crippled transportation, the call for an underground system became urgent. Snow had paralyzed New York, trapping people in their homes for days. If the city wanted to survive future disasters, it needed something more reliable, something below ground, untouched by weather. By the 1890s, New York was ready to move forward. The government created the Rapid Transit Commission to plan a system of underground trains. The goal was audacious: to dig miles of tunnels beneath one of the busiest cities on Earth without collapsing its foundations. After years of debate, the city awarded the contract in 1900 to John B. McDonald, backed by financier August Belmont, Jr. Their company, the Rapid Transit Construction Company, signed what became known as Contract 1. It was a pact between the city and private enterprise. The city would own the tunnels, but a private company would build and operate them for a fixed fare of 5 cents. Construction began on March 24, 1900, at City Hall. Workers called sandhogs dug through mud, rock, and sewage under impossible conditions. Entire streets were torn open. People in Manhattan complained of noise and dust, while engineers worried about collapse under fragile buildings. Dozens of workers were injured or killed. Yet the city pressed on. It was not just digging a tunnel, it was digging toward a new identity. When the subway opened in 1904, it instantly changed life in New York. For 5 cents, anyone could travel 9 miles in under half an hour. The first line ran from City Hall through the heart of Manhattan up to 145th Street. The stations were bright and elegant, tiled in white with decorative mosaics. The City Hall station, the jewel of the system, shimmered with vaulted ceilings and chandeliers. Over 150,000 people rode on opening day. Newspapers called it the greatest public improvement in New York's history. In the years that followed, the subway became a symbol of progress. By 1908, tunnels had crossed the East River to Brooklyn via the Jereleman Street Tunnel, the first underwater subway link between boroughs. For the first time, Brooklyn was no longer a separate city in spirit. The subway made it part of one greater New York. Trains soon stretched to the Bronx and Queens, connecting neighborhoods that had once felt worlds apart. The underground web expanded at a breathtaking pace. But with success came competition and chaos. The original operator, the Interborough Rapid Transit Company, or IRT, held power over Manhattan and parts of the Bronx. Meanwhile, another giant, the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company, or BRT, was building its own lines, especially in Brooklyn and Queens. Each company sought dominance, and both were under pressure to keep fares low. The city watched as private empires fought to carve up its underground future.
In 1913, the city struck a bold deal known as the Dual Contracts. It was a massive expansion agreement with both the IRT and BRT to build hundreds of miles of new tracks. The goal was simple: reach every borough and every neighborhood. The cost was enormous, but the fare remained fixed at 5 cents, a political promise that would haunt the system for decades. The dual contracts turned New York into the most connected city on Earth, but they also set the stage for financial disaster. The 1920s brought prosperity and modernization, but underneath the city, the subway companies were drowning in debt. They couldn't raise fares, yet maintenance costs were soaring. The lines grew longer, the trains more crowded, and the profit margins disappeared. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, the private operators collapsed under the strain. The BRT reorganized as the Brooklyn Manhattan Transit Corporation, BMT, but the problems remained. The dream of cheap, universal transit had turned into a burden. Amid the turmoil, the city decided to take control of its own destiny. In 1932, New York opened the first city-owned subway line, the Independent Subway System, or IND. The first route ran under 8th Avenue in Manhattan, and the city proudly declared it would never belong to private investors. The IND represented a shift in philosophy. Transportation was now a public service, not just a business. For the first time, New York began to unify its fractured network. The unification became complete on June 1, 1940. The city government bought out the IRT and BMT, merging all three systems, IRT, BMT, and IND, under public ownership. New York Subway was finally one entity, run for the people, not for profit. It was a monumental moment in the city's history. A century of competition had ended, replaced by a single network that stretched from the Bronx to Coney Island. The mid-20th century was the subway's golden age. Ridership soared during World War II as gasoline was rationed and cars were scarce. The subway became the great equalizer. Rich and poor, native and immigrant, all shared the same cars. Trains ran day and night, ferrying workers to factories, soldiers to ports, families to parks. The stations gleamed, the trains hummed, and the system seemed unstoppable. But behind the scenes, trouble was building. The 5-cent fare, unchanged for decades, could no longer sustain the system. Inflation and rising costs strained the city's finances. Deferred maintenance began to show. By the 1950s, the once proud infrastructure was aging, the rolling stock outdated, and the signals unreliable. Yet the subway kept running, every hour of every day. It had become the city's heartbeat, but a heartbeat under stress. After the war, the automobile age transformed America. Highways and suburban sprawl drew millions away from the city. Middle-class families left for the suburbs and the tax base shrank. The subway, designed for a growing metropolis, now carried fewer riders and more problems. By the 1970s, New York was in crisis. Graffiti covered the walls. Crime rose. Trains broke down constantly, and stations crumbled from neglect. Headlines around the world called the system dangerous and decayed. The subway's decline mirrored that of the city itself. New York faced bankruptcy in 1975. Crime soared, unemployment rose, and its reputation darkened. Yet through it all, the trains kept running, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The decision to never shut down became a matter of pride and survival. No matter how bad things got, the subway would move. It was a symbol of endurance, carrying millions through uncertainty. By the 1980s, the system had reached a breaking point, but New York, as always, refused to surrender. The city and the newly empowered Metropolitan Transportation Authority launched a massive rehabilitation program. Billions were poured into repairing tracks, replacing cars, and cleaning stations. Police patrols increased. Graffiti was scrubbed away. New trains arrived, sleek and air-conditioned. Slowly, the subway began to heal. In 1972, designer Massimo Vignelli introduced a new subway map, a bold, abstract design meant to simplify the complex network. Though controversial at first, it represented a shift in how the city saw itself, modern, bold, willing to rethink tradition. Over the next decades, color-coded lines, improved signage, and consistent station design helped unify what had once been a patchwork of competing systems. The subway was finding its identity again.
The 1990s and early 2000s brought a renaissance. Ridership grew as crime fell and the city revitalized. Investments expanded the network, most notably the extension of the 7 Line to Hudson Yards and the long-awaited 2nd Avenue subway, whose first phase opened in 2017 after nearly a century of planning. The system modernized fare collection with MetroCards, digital displays, and security cameras. What had been a relic of the early 20th century now stood as a symbol of urban resilience. Yet beneath the revival lay new challenges. The infrastructure remained ancient in places, some tunnels and stations dating back to the early 1900s. Flooding from hurricanes, especially Hurricane Sandy in 2012, exposed the system's vulnerability. Rising sea levels, outdated signals, and soaring repair costs reminded New Yorkers that the subway's greatest battles were not just in its past, they were still unfolding. Hidden below the modern system are reminders of its long journey. The old City Hall station, with its curved platform and glass skylights, remains sealed off since 1945 because newer trains were too long to stop there safely. It sits in silence beneath City Hall, a time capsule of 1904 splendor. For those who glimpse it on special tours, it's a haunting reminder of the subway's birth, beauty, progress, and the cost of change frozen in one place. The unification of the subway's 3 companies was more than a merger of steel. It was a merging of identities. Different tunnel sizes, track gauges, and power systems had to be integrated. The process took decades, and remnants of the old rivalries still exist in the differing car dimensions and station layouts that puzzle riders today. The subway's patchwork nature is not a flaw. It's a fossil record of ambition layered over ambition. The 5-cent fare, once a symbol of fairness, nearly killed the system that it helped build. Keeping the fare frozen while the cost of labor and materials soared left the private companies unable to maintain their lines. Bankruptcy was inevitable. The city learned that accessibility without sustainability was a false promise, one that echoed through decades of public policy. The most revealing truth is that the subway and the city share one fate. When New York thrived, the subway expanded. When the city struggled, the subway decayed. When the city rebuilt, the subway was reborn. The tunnels are not just steel and concrete, they are mirrors reflecting the heartbeat of the metropolis above. Every boom and bust in New York's history can be traced in the state of its underground. Today, the New York City subway remains one of the largest and most complex transit systems in the world, with 472 stations and more than 665 miles of track. It operates 24 hours a day, a promise of accessibility unmatched by any other major city. Millions depend on it each day. It is not perfect, but it endures. Its sounds, its heat, its rush hour chaos are as much a part of the city's identity as the skyline above. The subway story is still being written. Automation, digital payments, accessibility upgrades, and climate resilience are shaping its future. Yet every modern improvement sits atop the same tunnels dug by hand over a century ago. Every rumble through a century-old tunnel connects the past to the present. Alfred Ely Beach's dream, Belmont's money, the Sandhog's sweat, and the millions who built their lives around it. When you descend the stairs into the subway, you enter more than a station. You enter the city's memory. You walk through the ghosts of its laborers, its immigrants, its financiers, its reformers. You step into a system that almost collapsed but refused to die. Each stop tells a story. Each tunnel holds a secret. The system endures because New York endures.
The next time you swipe your card, pause for a second. Feel the air rush from the tunnel. Hear the approaching train. That sound has not stopped for over a century. It carried workers through wars, families through blackouts, survivors through storms. It has seen the city rise and fall and rise again. New York's subway is not just a means of getting somewhere. It is a monument to endurance, a testament to a city that keeps moving no matter what stands in its way. The steel, the noise, the grime, the grandeur, all tell the same truth. New York survives by motion. And as the city keeps moving, so does its story. Beneath your feet, the past hums on rails of iron. Above, the city it built continues to dream, rebuild, and reach higher. The subway is not just underground. It is the soul of New York, moving, restless, and alive. If you've enjoyed uncovering the history of the New York City subway, share your thoughts in the comments. Which city's hidden past should we explore next? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay curious, because beneath every city, another story waits in the dark.